Okay, so picture this. A cramped corner office packed with about 12 engineers, just barely enough space to move without knocking into someone's chair. Cables everywhere, whiteboards half wiped, coffee that's way too strong. And down there, they're quietly running the company's entire data platform. Meanwhile, upstairs, total chaos, flashy meetings, buzzwords, people who barely understand what's going on. And the weird part is, nobody really realizes how much this small room is actually holding everything together. Okay, so inside this corner office, it's kind of hard to explain unless you've seen it yourself. 12 engineers, packed into a space that's just barely big enough for all of them. And yet somehow everything feels in sync, like there's a rhythm to it. Alex usually shows up first with a box of cheap pastries, just quietly placing it down like a routine nobody ever questioned. Marisol's already been there for an hour, eyes locked into her screens, building out some new visualization layer like she's pulling order out of chaos. Kenny is always half-focused, muttering in Python under his breath like it's some kind of private language only the room understands. And then there's Claire. She doesn't really announce herself. She just walks in, and the whole room shifts slightly, like a change in pressure. No big gestures, no speeches, nothing like that. She'll just look around, take in the state of things, maybe give a small nod. That's it. And somehow, that's enough to move everything forward. It's not micromanagement at all. If anything, it's the opposite. People already know what to do before she even says anything. Jira tickets start getting updated almost instinctively. Someone notices a pipeline hiccup from last night, and before it even becomes a problem, it's already being dissected in a shared terminal. No panic, no noise. Just this quiet coordination that's been built over years of working side by side. 7 years. Actually, that's what turns into something strange after a while. Not just a team anymore. More like a single system that just happens to have 12 different people inside it. They don't overtalk things. They don't need to. Someone picks up where someone else left off without even asking. It's like they've all memorized the same internal map of how everything should flow. Claire moves through the space slowly, almost like she's checking the pulse of the room rather than managing it. She'll pause behind someone's desk, glance at a screen, maybe point once, and that's all it takes. No long explanations, no correction loops, just one small gesture and things click into place. And there's this one weird detail everyone's gotten used to, even if nobody really talks about it. Near the back of the room sits this gray housing unit by the Ethernet hub. Nobody outside the team ever really understood what it did, but Claire does. She'll walk by it, tap it twice lightly, almost like knocking on wood, and then just keep going. The interns used to joke about it, but after a while, nobody even asks anymore. It just is. What's strange is how calm everything feels even when things are moving fast. Like even when something breaks. It doesn't really break the rhythm. Someone just adjusts. Someone else reroutes. And the system keeps going. No drama, no raised voices. Just quiet problem solving that feels almost automatic at this point. And Claire, she's at the center of it, but not in a loud way. More like gravity. You don't really notice her forcing anything, but everything is still somehow aligned around her. She doesn't chase control, she just maintains balance. And the team, well, they trust that completely. Probably more than they even realize. It's the kind of setup that doesn't look impressive from the outside, just a cramped office, bad coffee, tangled cables everywhere, but inside it, there's this strange efficiency, like watching a machine that learned how to think for itself. Sometimes there's even this silence that doesn't feel awkward at all. Just focused, like everyone already knows the next step before it happens. No one's rushing to prove anything, no one's trying to be the loudest in the room, it's just work, flowing from one person to the next, like it was always meant to move that way. And if you stand there long enough, you start to realize it's not just a team working together, it's something closer to a single mind split into 12 different hands. So day to day in that room, it almost never starts loud, it just kind of begins. Alex usually walks in first with that same cheap box of pastries, like clockwork. Nobody even asks where he gets them anymore. He just drops them on the nearest cleared corner of a desk and someone grabs one without breaking whatever they're working on. It's not a ritual they planned, it just became one. Marisol is almost always already there before most people even think about starting. She's usually deep into whatever new visualization layer she's building, eyes locked on multiple screens, dragging patterns out of data like she's reading something only she can see. And Kenny. He's in his own world half the time, headphones on, muttering Python under his breath like it's some kind of language that keeps the system alive. The room itself is messy in a very specific way, not disorganized, just active. Whiteboards covered in half-erased diagrams, old architecture sketches layered over new ones, cables running across desks like nobody ever had time to make them neat. But somehow everyone knows exactly which one does what. There's always at least one shared terminal window open on someone's screen. And it's never just one person using it. It's more like the whole team is leaning into it together, quietly dissecting whatever happened overnight. And Claire, she moves through all of that without ever really disrupting it. She doesn't announce tasks or assign things in a loud way. She just walks the room slowly, almost like she's checking the temperature of everything. She'll pause behind a screen, look at something for a second, maybe tilt her head slightly, and that's it. No long explanations, no back and forth debates. The correction just happens. Someone updates a ticket. Someone else adjusts a model. A pipeline issue from the night before gets quietly pulled apart and fixed before it even turns into a conversation. It's like the team already knows how she thinks, so she doesn't need to say much. There's a shared understanding there that didn't happen overnight. 7 years of working in the same space, solving the same kinds of problems, dealing with the same systems breaking in similar ways. At some point, they stopped needing full sentences, a half look, a short comment, even silence sometimes. That was enough. If something broke, it wasn't panic, it was just movement. Someone would already be halfway into a fix while someone else was checking logs. And nobody stepped on each other's work. It all just fit. The tools they used were simple on the surface, but layered in ways only they fully understood. Shared terminals, internal dashboards, anomaly detection modules that Marisol basically treated like extensions of her own thinking. Claire would circle around occasionally, not hovering, just observing. Every now and then she'd tap through screens, point once at a metric, or just nod slightly, and people would immediately adjust direction like they had been waiting for that exact signal. And then there's that gray housing unit near the Ethernet hub. It doesn't look like much. No branding, no labels, just a slightly worn piece of hardware tucked into the back of the room like it was forgotten there. Interns used to ask about it when they first joined, but after a while, everyone just stopped talking about it. Claire is really the only one who ever interacts with it directly. She'll walk by, tap it twice lightly, almost absent-minded, like knocking on wood, and then just keep moving. No explanation, no discussion, it just became part of the room's rhythm, like background noise you stop noticing. What's interesting is how calm everything feels even when things get complicated. There's humor in it too, just not the obvious kind. Someone will make a dry comment in chat about a failing job being emotionally unavailable. Or Kenny will compare a bug to something that absolutely shouldn't be running in production, and people just get it. A quick laugh. Then back to work. Nothing ever really derails the flow for long. Even when multiple systems are being checked at once. Even when logs are being pulled from different directions. There's no sense of chaos. It's structured, but not rigid. Like everyone trusts the shape of the system enough to move freely inside it. Claire doesn't tighten control when things get busy. She actually does the opposite. She steps back a little, lets them run, only stepping in when something drifts too far off course. And that trust goes both ways. Nobody second guesses her calls, because over time they've all seen the pattern. When she pauses, it means something. When she adjusts something quietly, it's already been thought through 5 steps ahead. So the team just follows that rhythm without needing constant confirmation. By the end of most days, the room doesn't feel drained, it feels settled, like a system that's reached equilibrium but is still ready to move if needed. Monitors glow, coffee goes cold, someone is still debugging something in the corner, and Claire is usually there at some point near the gray unit again, checking it the same way she always does, like confirming that everything important is still exactly where it should be. So the contrast between Claire's team and the rest of the company, honestly, it's almost hard to believe they're even inside the same building sometimes. Down in that corner office, everything is quiet, technical, grounded in actual systems that either work or don't. But upstairs, it's like a completely different universe where everything is more about perception than function. You've got beanbag chairs everywhere, neon slogans about crushing goals, and this constant energy of people trying to look like they're building the future without really touching the thing that actually runs it. And the funny part is, most of them don't really understand what Claire's team even does. Not in a deep way. They know it's important. Sure, they know there's something about data and machine learning and infrastructure, but to them it's kind of like magic. Like it just happens in the background because someone smart waved a hand at it. And Claire, she gets pulled into that world sometimes, but only in a very controlled way. They wheel her out for presentations like she's some kind of internal prototype, almost like a Tesla demo sitting under bright lights. She stands in front of slides, shows charts, explains systems in a way that keeps everything just simple enough for executives to nod along. And then once the applause is done, she disappears back down into the engine room. No seat at the real decision table, no influence on direction, just the person who keeps everything from falling apart quietly in the background. It's not even personal, at least not on the surface. It's just how the structure works. She builds it, they present it. Upstairs, it's all optics. Excel suite executives who talk in buzzwords like their native language. They throw around terms like predictive clarity and proprietary intelligence like they invented them. But most of the time, it's clear they're just repeating things they've heard in meetings. They don't really engage with the system itself. They engage with how it looks in a deck. And that's where the disconnect starts to show. Because what Claire's team builds is precise, fragile in some ways, extremely intentional. But what gets understood upstairs is always simplified into something marketable, something that sounds like innovation, even if it barely resembles the original system. And Graham sits right in the middle of all of that. He's one of those managers who's always slightly too comfortable in executive rooms, like he learned the language of leadership before he learned what was actually being led. He's the one who organizes how Claire gets presented. He's also the one who decides what parts of her work are worth showing and what parts are better left out of the conversation entirely. He'll stand in meetings with this confident energy, talking about systems like he's part of the engineering process, even though he's really just translating it into something executives can digest without asking too many technical questions. And then he'll turn around and send an email about logging hours more transparently, like that's the real issue at hand. The rest of the company around them is kind of a blur of marketing energy and half-understood ambition. People sitting in open spaces with laptops covered in stickers. Brainstorming sessions that feel more like creative workshops than technical planning. There's always talk about culture, storytelling, user engagement, things that sound important but don't always connect back to the actual infrastructure that makes the product function. And Claire's team exists just below that layer, almost invisible unless something breaks or unless a presentation is needed. Then Taryn arrives, and things shift in a very visible way, at least on the surface. She comes in like she's stepping into a stage, not an office. Everything about her presence is curated for attention. Her arrival isn't subtle at all. It's framed like an event. Graham introduces her in a town hall-style moment, standing aside with this exaggerated flourish, like he's revealing some big strategic asset. And Taryn walks in waving like she's been part of the company forever, immediately bringing this energy that doesn't really match anything the engineering side recognizes as work. She takes over space almost instantly, not in a hostile way, more like in a rebranding sense. The northeast corner office, the one close to the data team's actual infrastructure flow, gets reassigned to her because someone upstairs thinks it will amplify creative energy. That's the phrase they use, amplify creative energy. Meanwhile, Claire just freezes for a second when she hears it, because that space isn't just an office, it's tied to systems, to access, to architecture that nobody upstairs really understands. But none of that matters in the moment it's announced. What matters is optics. Taryn's presence is treated like a cultural upgrade. Suddenly there are ring lights, succulents, mood boards appearing in spaces that used to be functional work areas. Slack channels start filling with posts about vibe and synergy and brand storytelling. And it all gets framed like progress, like the company is evolving into something more modern, more expressive, more aligned with how tech companies are supposed to look from the outside. Meanwhile, Claire's team is still doing the actual work, still maintaining systems, still keeping everything stable, still responding when things break at inconvenient hours. But their world doesn't get the same attention. It doesn't get captions or internal hype posts. It just runs quietly, reliably, almost invisibly. And that's really the core of the disconnect. On one side, you've got a group of people who think innovation is something you can present in a deck with nice visuals and confident language. And on the other side, you've got Claire and her team, who are actually building and maintaining the thing that makes all of that presentation even possible in the first place. But because their work is stable, because it doesn't constantly demand attention, it gets treated like background infrastructure instead of the core system it actually is. So Claire keeps getting pulled into meetings to explain things in simplified terms. Graham keeps translating technical reality into executive-friendly language. And Taryn keeps reshaping spaces into something more visually appealing. And the further that gap grows, the more invisible the real engineering layer becomes, even though it's the only reason anything upstairs is still working at all. It didn't really come with drama at first. That's the strange part. No alarms, no big announcement, nothing that felt like a turning point. Just a Monday morning where everything looked normal enough until it wasn't. A facility specialist showed up at the door like he was delivering something completely routine. Clipboard in hand, that slightly uncomfortable corporate expression on his face. Like he already knew this wasn't going to land well, but he also wasn't allowed to care. He cleared his throat, looked around the room, and said, "There's been a reallocation of space. You're going to need to start prepping for relocation by end of week." And for a second, nobody even reacted. Kenny was still wearing his headphones. Marisol didn't stop typing. Alex just blinked slowly, like he was trying to decide if he misheard the sentence or if reality had just shifted slightly off axis. It was one of those moments where the brain doesn't immediately accept the input. Claire, though she didn't ask why, she didn't challenge it, she just looked at him, nodded once, and said, "Will comply. Please send the final move order in writing." That's it. Calm, flat, controlled. The facility guy looked relieved, like he'd been bracing for a different version of this conversation. He muttered something about appreciation for professionalism and left quickly. Like staying any longer might make it feel more real than it was supposed to be. The moment the door shut, the room didn't explode or collapse or anything like that. It just went quiet in a different way. Not focused quiet like usual, more like paused quiet. The kind where everyone is waiting for someone else to confirm that what just happened actually happened. Marisol finally looked up. "Wait, what?" Claire didn't change her tone. "We've been evicted." Alex let out a short, disbelieving laugh that didn't really carry humor in it. What the hell does that even mean? Kenny actually pulled one ear of his headphones off slowly, like sound itself might have been distorted. "Are we being shut down?" "No," Claire said. "We're complying." That word again, complying. She said it like it wasn't emotional at all, just procedural, like she was reading a system log instead of describing a displacement. And that's when the shift started. Not in panic, but in motion, because Claire didn't sit there and argue or escalate or call meetings. She just stood up and said, "We're going to pack, we're going to move, and we're going to take everything, every router, every adapter, every whiteboard marker. We do it clean, no noise." It wasn't a suggestion, but it also wasn't harsh. That's what made it strange. It was just final. The team exchanged glances. There was anger there, definitely. Confusion too, but more than anything, there was trust, because Claire didn't do reactive decisions. If she said pack, then packing was the correct answer, even if nobody understood the full equation yet. So they started, and it wasn't chaotic. That's the thing. It should have been chaotic, but it wasn't. It was almost surgical. Marisol started pulling down configurations from screens. exporting visual layers with this focused intensity, like she was preserving something fragile. Alex began disconnecting hardware with slow precision, labeling cables without being told. Kenny stood up and started organizing his station into quiet, deliberate stacks like he was preparing for transport rather than eviction. No one raised their voice, no one rushed. Claire moved through the room once, then again, not micromanaging, not assigning, just observing. Occasionally, she'd pause near someone's desk, glance at a setup, and give a single small nod. That was enough. Whatever needed adjusting got adjusted without discussion. But there was something else happening too, something less visible. Near the back of the room sat the gray housing unit, the same one that had always been there, tucked near the Ethernet hub, slightly dented. No branding, no explanation that ever made sense to anyone outside the room. It wasn't talked about much, not because it was secret exactly, but because it had never needed explaining inside this team. Claire walked past it once during the packing, stopped briefly, and tapped it twice, lightly, like she always did. No one reacted. They never really did. It was just part of the rhythm. But this time, her hand lingered for a fraction longer before she moved on. And that small moment, it felt heavier than usual, even if nobody said it out loud, because underneath everything they were packing, the cables, the servers, the monitors, there was a system dependency that didn't exist in any document anyone outside the room had ever properly understood. A handshake protocol that wasn't just software, something tied to physical architecture, something anchored in that space, in that exact configuration. Not broken, not fragile, just bound. But Claire didn't explain it yet. Not now. Not while they were still mid-motion, still absorbing the fact that their entire workspace had just been reassigned like it was furniture. Instead, she just kept things moving. No paper trail, no escalation emails, no long explanations, just packing. And that's what made it feel tense. Even though nothing loud was happening, because everything was being handled too cleanly, too controlled, like the system wasn't collapsing, it was being deliberately disassembled. By midday, the corner office that once felt like their bunker didn't look like a bunker anymore. It looked like a skeleton, wires hanging, empty desks, half-erased whiteboards still showing traces of ideas that hadn't been finished yet. Claire took a photo of it before leaving, just one. Not emotional, not sentimental, more like documentation, evidence. And then they moved. Down the hallway, past teams who barely looked up, past marketing conversations and glass-walled rooms filled with brainstorming energy that had nothing to do with infrastructure or systems or anything grounded in what was actually happening. No one stopped them. No one really understood what they were seeing, and Claire didn't turn back. Because whatever had just been set in motion wasn't loud enough yet to announce itself. But it was already in motion. At first, nothing looks broken. That's what makes it harder to notice. The annex space isn't ideal, but it works. Barely. No windows worth mentioning. The AC kind of wheezes instead of running properly. And there's this constant background hum from something in the wall that nobody ever bothers to trace. But the team settles in anyway. They always do. Claire doesn't complain. She never does. She just adjusts. Monitors get set up again. Cables rerouted through floor gaps. Marisol rebuilds her visualization stack like nothing changed. Just a different table now. Alex reestablishes his scripts, quietly testing connections like he's checking if the world is still responding the same way. Kenny sets his usual station back up, Red Bull cans forming the same small stack like a personal landmark. And Claire, she stands near the door for a moment longer than usual, not observing the room, observing the system. Something feels slightly off, not broken, just misaligned. She doesn't say it out loud. Instead, she logs it. That becomes the pattern. Because the first real change isn't visible in the room, it's in access. Permissions shift quietly. At first, it's small things. A dashboard that used to load instantly now hesitates for a fraction of a second before resolving. A logging endpoint that returns slightly delayed responses. Nothing anyone else would flag as urgent. Nothing that would trigger alerts. But Claire notices, of course she does. She opens the system logs and starts tracking everything with a level of attention that doesn't feel reactive. It feels preventative, like she's documenting a patient she already knows is getting worse. Each anomaly gets timestamped. Each delay gets recorded. Each small deviation gets added to a private folder she creates without naming it anything dramatic. Just reallocation impact notes. No drama, no escalation. Just recording. Meanwhile, upstairs, logic starts bleeding into the system in ways that don't fully understand what they're touching. Someone in marketing adjusts a dashboard color scheme for brand alignment. A UI consultant swaps out a component because it feels more modern. A new authentication wrapper gets introduced because it simplifies onboarding flow. None of these changes are malicious. They're just uninformed, confident, detached from the underlying structure. And each time one of these changes lands, Claire sees the ripple. Not immediately catastrophic, just subtle degradation. Latency curves stretching slightly longer than they should. Memory caches behaving inconsistently. One service occasionally retrying a handshake that used to resolve cleanly. She doesn't interrupt the changes. She just watches and logs. Because there's something most people don't understand about systems like this. They don't break loudly unless you force them to, most of the time. They degrade quietly when assumptions change without understanding what those assumptions are built on. And Claire built this system on assumptions no one else ever bothered to fully map, especially the handshake layer. That part doesn't get talked about much anymore. Not in meetings, not in documentation that anyone outside her team reads. But it's still there, still active, still dependent on something physical. And now, after the relocation, she starts noticing something even more concerning. The system isn't just slower, it's slightly different. Like something in the routing logic is no longer following the exact path it used to. Not wrong, just rerouted. And rerouting something like that without understanding the dependency structure doesn't just change performance, it changes behavior. Claire opens a trace one evening while the annex is mostly empty, except for the low buzz of equipment and the occasional sound of someone typing too hard on a keyboard. She runs a full authentication flow, then another. Each time she watches the same pattern. Slight delays at the same node, a hesitation where there shouldn't be one, a fallback route that technically exists but was never meant to be primary. She doesn't react outwardly. She just leans back slightly in her chair and writes it down. Because now it's not just observation, it's confirmation. Someone upstairs has touched something they don't understand. And worse, they've done it repeatedly. There's also the permission drift. That's what she calls it internally, even though no official term exists for it. A slow, quiet reconfiguration of access boundaries. Things she used to be able to see now require additional approval layers. Internal services she could once trace directly now return partial views unless accessed through filtered endpoints. Nothing is fully blocked. That would be too obvious. Instead, everything is just slightly more indirect. Like the system is being wrapped in an extra layer of interpretation. And Claire knows exactly what that leads to. Misunderstanding, then dependency erosion. Then failure that no one can fully explain because the original structure is no longer visible in its entirety. But she doesn't escalate it. Not yet, because escalation assumes someone will understand the issue in time, and she's not convinced of that anymore. So instead, she builds her own parallel record. Every change, every timestamp, every modified dependency chain gets logged into her private archive. Not shared, not discussed, just preserved. Alex notices her doing it one afternoon. He doesn't ask directly, he just glances at her screen while passing by and says something like, "You think we're being phased out?" Claire doesn't look up. No. Then after a pause, she adds, "We're being reshaped." Not angry, not alarmed, just descriptive. And that's what makes it heavier. Because by then, even the team starts feeling it. Not in a dramatic way, more like friction. Jobs that used to run clean now occasionally stall. A deployment that used to take minutes now requires manual retries. Logs that used to align cleanly now show inconsistent sequencing. Small things, stacked together. And Claire keeps watching all of it without intervening, because intervention would require acknowledging that the system is still fully under their control. And she's not fully sure that's true anymore. One night, after most people leave, she sits alone in the annex and opens the root trace again. The same system she's run 1,000 times. But this time she notices something she didn't before. A dependency path that should terminate cleanly doesn't. It loops, not infinitely, just enough to introduce delay, enough to destabilize timing, enough to slowly change behavior over time. She stares at it for a long moment, then closes the laptop. No reaction, no panic. Just understanding, and somewhere beneath that understanding, something quieter, preparation. Because now she knows this isn't random drift. It's structured interference, and it's getting closer to something she recognizes as critical. Back in the annex, the gray hum of the environment continues like nothing is wrong. But Claire's notes are getting longer, and her silence is getting more deliberate. Demo day always starts with this weird kind of optimism that feels slightly forced. Like the building is trying too hard to believe in itself. The main conference room has been transformed overnight. Sleek lighting, branded screens, glass tables polished to the point where everything reflects just a little too clearly. There are bottled waters lined up perfectly, labels all facing the same direction. Someone from HR even added those printed welcome packets, just in case anyone forgot they were supposed to feel excited. Outside, everything feels normal. Inside, it feels staged. Graham is already in position at the front of the room, pacing just slightly, not enough to look nervous, just enough to look like he's performing confidence instead of feeling it. He's wearing that version of himself that shows up for investors. Tightened posture, controlled smile, voice ready to turn anything into momentum. Claire isn't in the room, not physically. She's in the annex space a few floors away, but she's already watching. Not in a dramatic way, just through logs, telemetry, system traces, quiet streams of data moving across her screen like a second version of reality. Back in the conference room, the investors start arriving one by one. You can always tell them apart. Some are casual but expensive, like they're trying not to look like what they are. Others are fully leaned into it, tailored suits, quiet confidence, the kind of people who don't ask questions out loud unless they already know the answer. One of them glances at the dashboard preview on the screen and doesn't say anything, just watches. That's usually the dangerous kind. Graham steps forward. "All right," he says, and claps once like he's trying to reset the room. "Let's get started." The lights dim slightly. The main screen switches to the demo environment. This is the moment. The system Claire's team built over years is about to be shown in its polished, presentation-ready form, clean visuals, fast response times, everything simplified for consumption. Taryn is seated off to the side, already half filming something on her phone. There's a soft energy in the room that feels more like marketing than engineering. Graham continues, voice smooth now. "We've built something that gives real-time predictive clarity across our entire data infrastructure. What you're about to see is the next evolution in how we interact with complex systems." Claire watches the logs. She sees the initial request go out. Login flow initiated. Authentication sequence triggered. Everything normal so far. Then it hits the first checkpoint. The handshake layer, and there's a hesitation. Not a failure yet, just a delay. Back in the room, the loading spinner appears on screen. Graham keeps talking. "It's fine," he smiles. "These systems sometimes take a moment on first load. High throughput environment, a few soft chuckles from the front row. Investors stay quiet, still watching. Jonah, sitting near the back with a laptop open, frowns slightly. His fingers start moving. Something's off, he mutters under his breath. The system tries again. Second authentication attempt. Claire sees it clearly now. The handshake request is not resolving along its primary path. It's falling back to something older, something incomplete, and slower. In the conference room, the spinner keeps spinning. Graham's voice tightens just a little. "We might just have a slight cache warm-up delay. Totally expected during live environment transitions." He laughs lightly. No one really laughs with him. Jonah leans forward now, more focused. "That shouldn't be happening," he says quietly. A senior engineer next to him glances over. "What?" Jonah doesn't answer immediately. He's watching the authentication trace. And what he sees doesn't make sense in the current architecture because the system is behaving like something is missing. Not broken. Missing. Claire watches too. Her expression doesn't change. But internally, she already knows, because she built the system around something no one else fully appreciated. The handshake wasn't just software. It wasn't meant to be abstracted. It was anchored, physically tied to a specific hardware dependency in their original corner office environment. That gray housing unit near the Ethernet hub. The one everyone ignored, the one she tapped twice without explanation. It wasn't decorative, it was structural. And now that structure is gone from its original placement, moved, or more accurately, disconnected from its intended topology. Back in the room, the screen finally changes. Access key not found. Silence hits instantly, not loud silence. The kind that removes air from a room. Graham blinks. Once, twice, then he steps slightly closer to the screen like proximity might fix it. "That's not right," he says. His voice is still controlled, but the edges are starting to fray. Jonah stands up. No, that's not supposed to happen." He's already typing faster now, trying to reroute, trying to force a fallback, trying to find something that isn't there anymore. Investors are no longer relaxed. One of them tilts their head slightly. Another checks their phone. Not because they're bored, because they're recalculating. Graham turns slightly toward Jonah. "Fix it," he says quietly. Jonah doesn't respond immediately. He's staring at the logs. Then he says it, low, almost disbelieving. The master handshake isn't resolving. Graham snaps back. "What does that mean?" Jonah hesitates. "It means the system is looking for a physical binding point that isn't responding." Graham frowns. "That's not possible." Jonah shakes his head. "It is if the hardware node was relocated or disconnected from its original authentication context." A pause. Then he adds, quieter, "We never replicated it properly." That line lands heavier than anything else so far, because now it's not just a glitch. It's structural failure. Claire watches the same conclusion form across multiple logs simultaneously. Authentication loops collapsing into dead ends. Retry attempts failing faster each time. Timeouts increasing in a predictable pattern. The system isn't crashing. It's rejecting access. Back in the room, someone in the back whispers something to another investor. No one laughs now. Graham tries again. He clicks, refreshes, re-triggers the demo flow. Same result. Access key not found? His smile is gone now. Not fully, but enough that everyone notices. "We just need to restart the environment," he says quickly. "That's all. It's a simple reset issue." Jonah looks up at him. No, just that. No elaboration. Graham freezes for a half second. "What do you mean, no?" Jonah swallows. "Because it's not environment state. It's authentication architecture." He points at the screen. "The handshake layer is hardwired to a physical dependency we don't have access to anymore." A pause, then quieter. "Claire designed it that way." That name finally lands in the room differently, not as background, as cause. Graham turns slightly, like the concept of Claire just became physically inconvenient. "We can bypass it," he says quickly. Jonah shakes his head again. "No fallback was deployed. It's not virtual. It's not overridable in software." Silence again, but heavier now. One investor closes their folder slowly. That sound is louder than anything else. Another leans back slightly. "This isn't just a demo issue anymore. It's a system integrity question." Claire watches all of it without moving. She sees every attempt at recovery, every failed reroute, every growing assumption collapsing in real time, and she doesn't intervene. Because there's nothing to fix, only something to observe. Back in the room, Graham is still talking, but it's not landing anymore. "We can resolve this quickly," he says. "It's a minor integration hiccup." But no one is nodding. No one is following. Jonah is still staring at the logs like they've betrayed him personally. And somewhere in that moment, it becomes clear to everyone in the room, even if they can't articulate it yet, this isn't a bug. It's a dependency failure they were never supposed to ignore. And Claire knew that from the beginning. It doesn't end with shouting. That's the first thing that feels strange about it. There's no dramatic collapse, no explosion of anger, no one flipping tables or storming out mid-sentence. It's quieter than that, almost clinical. The investors just start leaving. Not all at once, not in a coordinated exit, one by one, in a way that feels more final than any argument could have been. The first one closes their folder, slowly, like they're sealing something they've already decided on. Then they stand up, no comment, no expression that gives anything away, just a quiet adjustment of their jacket and a step toward the door. Then another follows, and another. No one announces rejection, they don't need to. The movement in the room says everything. Graham is still talking, but now it feels like his voice is coming from slightly too far away from reality. He's trying to hold the moment together with language that used to work. We're just experiencing a minor integration hiccup. High-scale systems often require stabilization after environment shifts, but nobody is listening anymore. Jonah isn't typing now. He's just staring at the screen like he's trying to understand how something so structurally simple could collapse so completely when a single dependency is removed. The CEO is no longer leaning forward. He's just watching, quiet, evaluating, not angry yet, just done. And that's worse. Because once the evaluation phase starts, everything after that becomes administrative. Graham finally realizes it a second too late. He stops talking. For the first time, there's no recovery script running in his head. Just silence. Back in the annex space, Claire sees all of it unfold in real time through logs that don't lie, don't interpret, don't soften anything. The authentication failures taper off because no one is even trying anymore. The system is still running, technically, but it's no longer being trusted. That's the real failure. Not the crash, the abandonment. She closes her laptop. No reaction on her face, no satisfaction, no anger, just completion. Because for her, this moment isn't sudden. It's the endpoint of something she already mapped weeks ago when she started logging the subtle degradations, the permission shifts, the architectural drift. She didn't guess where it would end. She simply waited until it got there. And now it has, in the conference room, someone is already on their phone, not discreetly anymore, fully openly, pulling up notes, competitor comparisons, internal reports, reevaluating everything. Because that's what happens in these rooms when trust breaks. Everything becomes data again. Graham finally steps back from the screen, not dramatically, just enough to acknowledge that the system is no longer responding to his narrative. He looks at Jonah. Jonah doesn't look back immediately. When he finally does, it's not accusation, it's something closer to resignation. "We lost the handshake layer," Jonah says quietly. "It's not recoverable in this state." Graham blinks. "We can rebuild it." Jonah shakes his head. "Not in time." That phrase hangs there longer than anything else. Not in time. Because in corporate environments like this, timing is everything. Not correctness, not depth, just timing. And they missed it. The CEO finally speaks, voice low. "We'll need a full technical postmortem." That sentence alone tells Graham everything. Not anger. Just transition. The meeting is no longer a pitch. It's documentation. Graham doesn't respond. He just nods once. But it doesn't feel like agreement. It feels like acknowledgement of a boundary he didn't realize he was already crossing. And then it's over. No closing remarks, no applause, no handshake. Just people standing up and leaving a room that no longer feels like it belongs to the story they were trying to tell. Claire doesn't wait for any of that to finish. She never intended to. When she finally walks out of the annex, it's not hurried, not hidden, just calm. Like someone finishing a shift that ended earlier than scheduled but didn't require explanation. She doesn't look back at the system feeds, doesn't check for final metrics. She already knows what they'll show, back at the main building. Panic is starting to settle into something more structured, not chaos. Reorganization, people trying to understand ownership of failure, Slack channels lighting up with urgent questions that don't have immediate answers, requests for clarity, requests for accountability, requests that assume someone still has control of the system enough to fix it quickly. But that assumption is already gone. Graham is no longer the center of anything. He's just another name attached to a misalignment event, a bridge between expectation and reality that didn't hold. And slowly, that becomes the narrative. Not sabotage, not collapse, just misalignment, which is how companies often protect themselves from fully understanding what actually happened. Claire steps outside. The air feels different, even though it isn't. Nothing external has changed in a visible way, but something structural has. Not in the building, in the system of value around it, because now people know the platform doesn't behave the way they thought it did. And worse, they know why, or at least they suspect. The dependency is no longer invisible, even if they don't fully understand it yet. And Claire is fine with that, because she never built it to be obvious. She built it to be correct. Later, the shift begins quietly. No announcement, no press release, just movement. Marisol is the first to reach out. Not formally, just a message. Short, simple. Something like, "I think I want to understand what's next." Kenny follows a few days later. No explanation needed, just a commit pushed quietly to an external repository that Claire already has access to. Alex takes longer, but eventually, his resignation appears in the system with no drama attached, just a clean exit path. Even Tran, in her own way, repositions herself, her messaging changes. The tone softens. The branding evolves into something less about spectacle and more about alignment. She calls it advisory now, manifesting transition instead of ownership. And Claire watches all of it without pushing, without pulling, just letting it happen at the pace it needs to. Because what's forming isn't a reaction, it's a reassembly. Elsewhere, under a different name, the structure begins again. Or in analytics isn't announced loudly, it doesn't need to be. It starts the way most real systems do. Quietly, with people who already understand the shape of the work. The code is familiar, but stripped of unnecessary noise. The architecture is leaner, more direct, less layered with interpretation from people who never touched the underlying logic. Claire doesn't call it a revolution. She doesn't call it anything. She just builds. And the people who were once invisible inside that corner office begin to appear again. Not as background support, but as part of the core structure. No speeches, no announcements, just continuity. And for the first time in a long time, nothing about the system feels like it's being misunderstood at the top. So yeah, it's kind of wild how the quiet parts of a system are usually the ones holding everything up. The people no one really notices. The things nobody thinks to question until they're gone. And once that balance shifts, everything else follows. Anyway, if you enjoyed this kind of story, feel free to like and subscribe, nothing forced. Just helps keep more of these coming, and I'll catch you in the next one.